Hey guys, tonight we are heading back. Way back. Back to a time before Rome, before the pyramids were even a blueprint. Back to the sun-scorched plains of ancient Mesopotamia. Picture a land cradled between two great rivers, where cities rise from the dust, and the stars in the night sky seem impossibly close, impossibly bright. The language you spoke is forgotten, silenced by time. The people who lived here, the Sumerians, invented it thousands of years before the first letter of the English alphabet was ever conceived. Imagine the scene. A scribe sits by the river, taking a lump of wet clay and shaping it into a small, pillow-like tablet. Some are mundane, receipts for goats, records of barley rations, legal contracts. They describe the creation of the heavens and the earth, the founding of the first cities, and a pantheon of powerful, larger-than-life deities who are brilliant and creative, but also petty, jealous, and terrifyingly destructive. These are not benevolent, distant gods. They walk the earth, they drink, they argue, they fight. They are intimately, and often violently, involved in the lives of the little creatures they created to serve them. Humanity. These tablets contain the story of the Anunnaki. And as we begin to read their story, as translated by the scholars of the 19th and 20th centuries, we see the foundation of a belief system. But soon, a new translator will arrive, a man who will look at these same wedges and see something else entirely. Not gods, but visitors. Not myth, but a technical manual. The stage is set, the stories have been preserved in baked clay, and the fuse of a modern mystery has just been lit. The ancient equivalent of spreadsheets and boring office memos. But others are different. They tell stories. Historians still argue whether these epic poems and myths were literal religious histories, political allegories designed to legitimize a king's rule, or simply the world's first works of epic fantasy. Whatever their purpose, their content is staggering. With a sharpened reed stylus, they press wedges into the soft surface. Not letters, but symbols representing syllables and concepts. It's an incredibly complex system, and for modern scholars, deciphering it was like trying to solve a Sudoku puzzle in 3 dimensions, in a language nobody had spoken for 4,000 years. It took decades of painstaking work, comparing texts and making inspired guesses. A real headache, probably made worse by the fact that there was no ancient Sumerian Rosetta Stone to give them a head start. The very names of your cities, Ur, Baruch, Eridu, vanish from human memory, buried under sleeping hills of earth. The very event that destroyed the city is what saved these stories. When the palace burned, the catastrophic fire that consumed the empire didn't destroy the clay tablets. It fired them like pottery in a kiln, baking the words into an almost eternal permanence. They are more durable than any papyrus scroll, more stable than a modern hard drive. The ultimate fireproof backup system, born from total annihilation. It's the mid-19th century now, and you are someone new. You're a European adventurer, perhaps, or a determined archaeologist, wiping sweat from your brow under that same unforgiving sun. You're digging, not for gold, not for jewels, but for knowledge, for a story. Your shovel scrapes against something hard. It's not a rock, it's a brick, and then another, and another. You found a wall, a building. Soon you unearth a whole library, but its books are not made of paper. They are heavy tablets of baked clay, each one covered in a dense, beautiful, and utterly baffling script of wedge-shaped marks. This is where our story begins, a story of gods and mortals, of profound creation and terrifying destruction. And just so we're clear, if you were actually dropped into this world with its plagues, famines, and complete lack of modern dentistry, you probably wouldn't survive the first week. It was a tough gig. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet are bare, and the earth beneath them is a mosaic of sun-cracked clay. The air is thick, heavy with the smell of river silt, baking mud bricks, and the distant hint of livestock. This is the land that would one day be called Iraq, but for you now, it is simply home. You look up and see the lifeblood of this place, the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers, glittering under a relentless sun. They are the reason you exist here, the reason anyone does. They feed the irrigation canals that you and your people painstakingly dug, turning this arid plain into the world's first cradle of civilization. In the distance, a great ziggurat, a stepped pyramid of mud brick, claws at the sky, a man-made mountain designed to bridge the gap between your world and the realm of the gods. You feel small under the vast, open sky. Powerless, you know your place. The gods are above, and you are below. Now let the millennia drift by like sand on the wind. The ziggurats crumble. The canals fill with dust. This, you will learn, is cuneiform. It is the oldest known form of writing on Earth, a mainstream historical fact, so foundational it changes our understanding of human history. As you sift through the rubble of this ancient library, perhaps the great library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, you learn a quirky and wonderful tidbit. But what do they say? That is the question that hangs in the dusty air. You trace the tiny wedges with your finger. They speak of a time before humans, when gods ruled the earth. The clay under your fingers is cool and damp. You are no longer the archaeologist, but the scribe. You are one of them. The Sumerians. You live in a world that is, by all accounts, brand new. It's a bustling, sprawling, organic labyrinth of mud brick houses, packed so tightly together you could probably jump from one flat roof to the next. The air hums with activity. The shouts of merchants in the marketplace, the bleating of sheep being led to slaughter, the rhythmic thump-thump of women grinding grain. A man is guiding a cart, its wooden discs bumping along a dusty track. This is it. The wheel. It's a mainstream historical fact that the first evidence for the wheeled vehicle appears right here, in Sumer, around 3500 BC. It's not used for a chariot just yet, but for pottery and for hauling goods. It revolutionizes agriculture and construction, allowing a few people to do the work of many. It seems so simple, so obvious to us now, but for thousands of years, the strongest thing on earth was an ox, and the fastest was a running human. Now, with the wheel and the plow, you can transform the very landscape. You are becoming masters of your world, and the constant, underlying murmur of thousands of people living together for the first time. This itself is a radical invention. The city, not just a big village, but a complex, organized system with social structures, specialized labor, and a government. And with government, of course, comes the world's first bureaucracy. You can almost picture a Sumerian official, stylus in hand, sighing as he carves a tablet detailing the new tax on goats. Some things truly are eternal. Before your people, there was. Well, not much. Small clusters of hunter-gatherers, scattered farming villages. You are a master of the new technology that makes all of this possible. Writing. With your reed stylus, you press the wedge-shaped marks into clay, capturing language, solidifying thought. You write down laws, codifying justice for the first time. You record astronomical observations, tracking the movements of the moon, the sun, and the 5 visible planets. You develop a sophisticated system of mathematics based on the number 60, a sexagesimal system. It's why we, thousands of years later, still have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. You are, at this very moment, shaping the way a person in the 21st century will check the time on their phone. A strange and dizzying thought. Their entire system of counting was a bit of a brain teaser, requiring you to think in multiples of 60, which makes your high school algebra class look like a walk in the park. A long, slow, predictable crawl of human development. And then there was you. Suddenly, archaeologists and historians are still debating how and why this cultural explosion happened so quickly in southern Mesopotamia. It's as if someone flipped a switch. In the grand, sprawling timeline of human history, the rise of Sumer is a sudden vertical spike, a miracle, or perhaps something else. You look around your city of Uruk. It's not a city as we'd know it today, with gleaming towers and paved roads. Your job, as a scribe, is one of the most respected. In the fields outside the city walls, you see another one of your people's game-changing inventions. After a long day of inscribing barley inventory, you unwind like any hard-working Sumerian, with a nice, cold beer. And this isn't just a casual detail. It's a cornerstone of your culture. How did a people who just yesterday were living in simple mud huts suddenly conceive of astronomy, complex law codes, monumental architecture, and the very concept of timekeeping? Your own legends, the stories you are painstakingly recording on these clay tablets, have a clear answer. It wasn't you. All of this knowledge, from agriculture to writing, was a gift. It was bestowed upon you by the gods. These powerful beings who descended from the heavens founded your cities, gave you the tools to survive, and taught you how to live. They gave you everything, and they demanded everything in return. Your labor, your loyalty, your worship. Beer was a divine gift, a staple of the daily diet for everyone from the king to the common laborer. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Your beer is thick, a bit like a porridge, full of floating bits of grain and bread mash from the fermentation process. To drink it, you use a long straw, probably made from a hollow reed, or even precious metals, like gold if you're a royal. This allows you to drink the liquid from underneath the scummy layer on top. Archaeologists have found these drinking straws in ancient tombs, buried with the dead so they could enjoy a pint in the afterlife. It's a wonderfully humanizing detail. You can just imagine two Sumerian friends sitting on a rooftop at dusk, sipping their murky brew through straws and complaining about their boss. But where did all this knowledge come from? As you look up from your work, out past the city walls into the deepening twilight, you see the stars begin to emerge in the clear desert sky. You know their patterns, their paths. You were taught to watch them. You were told they hold meaning. You were told that this is where the gods live. And you were told that one star, one that is not always there, is the most important of all. It is the home of the great gods, the Anunnaki. This is the official story, the one you write, the one you believe. For thousands of years, this will be the only story. A tale of powerful sky gods teaching their newfound human servants. It's a compelling myth. But as we'll soon see, a modern-day rereading of your work will propose a far more literal and far more shocking interpretation of just who these gods really were. The sun has set over the city of Uruk, and the flickering light of sesame oil lamps casts long, dancing shadows against the mud-brick walls of your home. The day's work is done. The accounts have been tallied, the contracts inscribed. Now is the time for stories. First, you have Anu, the Great Father, the God of the heavens. You have Enlil, whose name means Lord of the Air, or Lord of the Command. Enki is the God of water, but also of wisdom, magic, and creation. Where Enlil is strict and punishing, Enki is clever, crafty, and often a friend to mankind. He's the scientist, the engineer, the chief crafter of the pantheon. He resides in the Abzu, a mysterious domain of fresh water deep beneath the earth. He is a master of technology and a bit of a trickster. It is Enki who teaches humanity the arts and sciences. It is Enki who often intervenes to save humanity from the wrath of the other gods, particularly his grumpy half-brother Enlil. It's a classic dynamic, the rigid, authoritarian versus the clever innovator. He's the boss on the ground, the general manager of planet Earth. He is powerful, authoritative, and stern. It was Enlil who was given the tablets of destiny, divine objects that bestowed upon their holder the power to rule the universe. He's the one who enforces the laws, assigns the work, and he doesn't have a whole lot of patience for humanity. You learn to fear Enlil. He's the source of devastating storms and catastrophic floods. When he's angry, the whole world trembles. He's the tough, no-nonsense parent who demands obedience above all else. He's the chairman of the board, residing in his celestial kingdom, mostly removed from the day-to-day squabbles of Earth. He's the ultimate authority, but like a distant CEO, he often delegates the dirty work to his sons. His name, Anu, is the very root of the word that defines them all, the Anunnaki. It means, quite literally, those who from heaven to earth came. A simple, descriptive name that, for now, you take at face value. They came from the sky. They are gods. It's that simple. You gather with your family, or perhaps in a public courtyard, and listen as a storyteller, a keeper of the sacred words, begins to speak. He doesn't read from a tablet. The words live in his memory, passed down through generations. He speaks of the gods, not as abstract concepts or distant, ethereal spirits. He speaks of them as you know them, as beings, as individuals with names, personalities, and some serious family drama. Let's meet the main players in this celestial soap opera. Then you have his two most important sons, who could not be more different. Think of them as the cosmic odd couple. His half-brother is Enki. His name is Lord of the Earth, and he is a very different character. And of course, there are goddesses of immense power. The most prominent is Inanna, known to the later Babylonians and Assyrians as Ishtar. She is a fascinating, complex figure. There's Nanna, the god of the moon, who lights up the night sky. Each major Sumerian city was the property of a particular deity. They control the harvest, the floodwaters, the fate of your city in battle. Their moods dictate your very survival. You understand that your life is one of servitude. The very purpose of your existence, the reason you were brought into being, is to serve their needs, to provide them with food and comfort, to build their temples and sing their praises. You were created to be a worker, a servant. And the story of how that happened is one of the most profound and disturbing tales in your entire mythology. A story of divine burden, cosmic complaint, and a brilliant, terrifying solution. The city of Eridu belonged to Enki, the god of wisdom. Nippur, the great religious center, was Enlil's city. The vibrant city of Uruk belonged to both Anu, the sky father, and the fiery Inanna. The ziggurat at the center of each city wasn't just a temple. It was considered the literal earthly residence, a kind of landing pad or connection point for the city's patron deity. When you brought offerings to the temple, you weren't just praying. You were delivering food and drink to the god's house. You were paying rent. There's Utu, the sun god, who sees all injustice during the day and serves as the chief judge. There's Ninhursag, the great mother goddess, who assists in the creation of life. This is a fully realized, functioning celestial society. A mainstream historical fact is that this Mesopotamian pantheon forms the basis for many that came after. The gods of the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians are largely Sumerian gods with new names. Inanna becomes Ishtar. Enki becomes Aa. The stories are retold, adapted, but the core characters remain. Even the Greek pantheon, with its quarreling, all-too-human gods on Mount Olympus, owes a debt to these earlier Mesopotamian tales. Goddess of love, beauty, and sensuality, but also the goddess of war and political power. She is ambitious, passionate, and utterly ferocious. One minute she is the patron of taverns and prostitutes. The next she is a lion-headed warrior wading through a battlefield, delighting in the carnage. Historians still argue whether Inanna's dual nature represents the unpredictable but necessary union of procreation and destruction, or if her myths simply absorbed the traits of several older, more specialized goddesses over time. She is certainly never boring. Her stories are full of quests to gain more power, love affairs with gods and mortals, and descents into the underworld. The Anunnaki pantheon is vast, a complex web of familial relationships, rivalries, and jurisdictions. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. These gods had very specific cities they considered their own. As the storyteller's voice fills the quiet night, you feel a deep connection to these beings. They are not abstract. They are real. The air in the storyteller's courtyard grows heavy with anticipation. He has spoken of the gods, their powers, and their magnificent cities. But now he lowers his voice, drawing you in for the most important story of all, the story of you. You can almost hear them, leaning on their golden shovels, wiping sweat from their brows. Why do we have to do all the work? What's Enlil doing? He turns to the mother goddess, known in this text as Mami or Ninhursag. You are the birth goddess, he says. Create a mortal. Let him bear the yoke. Let man bear the load of the gods. The plan is ingenious and audacious. They won't just create a new being. The Enki and Ninmah myth tells of a kind of celebratory party after the main creation event. As the storyteller finishes, a quiet falls over the courtyard. The stars above, the home of the Anunnaki, seem to look down with an air of cosmic management. You now understand your place. You toil in the fields, you dig the canals, you build the temples, not just because the king commands it, but because that is the very reason you were made. Scholars continue to debate whether these stories were meant to instill a sense of fatalistic acceptance in the population, making them more compliant workers, or if they reflect a deeper philosophical understanding of life's inherent hardship. Either way, the message is clear. You are here to work. But this story, recorded on clay thousands of years ago, will one day be read in a new light. Someone will look at the story of mixing divine essence with the clay of the earth and see not myth, but a formula, not magic, but genetic engineering. Enki and the mother goddess, Ninhursag, start drinking a lot of that Sumerian beer we talked about. They get a little tipsy and decide to have a creation contest. Ninhursag makes a series of flawed humans. A barren woman, a being with no sexual organs, a man who cannot hold back his urine. For each one, the clever Enki finds a place for them in society, a role they can fulfill, a kind of divine justification for human diversity and disability. It's a surprisingly compassionate take, buried within the grander narrative of servitude. They will create a substitute worker, a Luluamelu, a primitive worker. The solution to their labor dispute is to bioengineer a slave race. Sitting in his temple, enjoying the cool breeze while we're down here getting blisters. The mother goddess agrees, but she needs the right materials. She declares, "It is fitting that I should make a human being. I need clay." Enki instructs her to take clay from the Abzu, the watery abyss from which he rules, the very navel of the earth. But clay alone is not enough. To make this new creature intelligent enough to understand commands and use tools, it needs a divine component. It needs a spirit. So the gods make a grim decision. They select one of their own, a god named Wee-Ulu, who had been a leader of the rebellion, and they slaughter him. They mix his flesh and blood, his divine intelligence, into the clay. This is a mainstream historical fact from the Atrahasis epic. Humanity is created from a mixture of clay and the blood of a sacrificed god. It's a potent image, suggesting that humanity is part of the earth, but also contains a spark of the divine, a kind of ghost in the machine. The divine complaint department is officially open. Finally, they snap. 7 are used to create males, 7 to create females. 14 birth goddesses are summoned, and together they work their magic, shaping the mixture. The creation is complete. The text reads, "The birth goddesses were assembled, and she, Mami, trod the clay in their presence. She mixed the clay with his flesh and blood. A new creature is born, designed for one purpose, to take over the hard labor, to lift the burden from the gods." In a dramatic scene from the Atrahasis epic, one of the primary Mesopotamian creation myths, the Agigi have had enough. They burn their tools, surround Enlil's great temple in the city of Nippur, and stage the first recorded labor strike in history. It's a full-blown divine rebellion. Why are you here? What is the purpose of this short, toilsome life on the hot plains of Mesopotamia? He is besieged in his own house by an angry mob of his relatives. He sends his vizier to see what's happening, and the report comes back. They won't work another day. The cosmic infrastructure project has ground to a halt. The senior gods hold an emergency council meeting. What should they do? Enlil, in his typical fashion, wants to just blast the rebels and be done with it. But the others are more pragmatic. They summon the leaders of the strike, hear their grievances, and even shed tears of sympathy. They agree the work is too hard, but it still needs to be done. The rivers need to be dredged, the canals maintained. The answer, according to the ancient tablets, is both simple and profoundly humbling. You were made because the gods got tired of working. It's the ultimate celestial outsourcing. The story begins in a time before humanity. The Anunnaki gods are all here on Earth, but things are not yet glamorous. The senior gods, the big shots like Anu, Enlil, and Enki, are in charge. The junior gods, the Igigi, are the working class. Their task is immense, backbreaking, and it has been going on for eons. They are digging. For 40 long years, the chants tell you, the lesser gods toiled, bearing the workload. They dug out the great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, carving the lifeblood of the land. They dredged the canals, built the shrines, and piled up the mountains of earth for the first ziggurats. Imagine being a god, a divine being, yet your eternal existence is spent hauling baskets of dirt under a blazing sun. It's not a good look. The resentment builds. The Igigi start to grumble. Enlil is furious, but also terrified. This is where the clever Enki, our resident scientist and problem solver, steps forward with a brilliant idea. The process they describe is messy, biological, and strangely specific. It is not a gentle sculpting of clay in a garden. The mother goddess, with Enki's help, presides over the procedure. She pinches off 14 pieces of the god-infused clay. And here's a quirky tidbit. The first version of humanity they made wasn't perfect. Some myths describe early drafts, flawed prototypes, but the central theme is undeniable. Your existence is a solution to a divine problem. You are a biological tool. The centuries peel away like layers of papyrus, and the world of the Sumerians fades into a deep, dreamlike past. You are no longer in a dusty courtyard in Uruk. It's the 20th century. The air smells not of river silt and livestock, but of exhaust fumes, old paper, and ambition. You find yourself in a library, or perhaps a study, surrounded by books on history, linguistics, and archaeology. It lands like a meteorite in the quiet world of ancient studies. Every story of a god performing a miracle is a misunderstood encounter with advanced technology. Remember the story of Enlil, the lord of the command, and his fearsome roar that could shake the world? He would often focus on a single Sumerian word and build a huge part of his theory on his unique translation of it. Scholars still argue whether Sitchin's translations were the work of a misunderstood genius who saw the truth, or a clever amateur who cherry-picked evidence and manipulated language to fit a preconceived narrative. The academic world would eventually come down firmly on the side of the latter. They would point out that he often took words out of context, ignored grammatical rules, and built his entire case on translations that no other Sumerologist in the world would endorse. A key example is the word mu. It took the dusty, difficult-to-understand world of ancient Mesopotamia and made it exciting, modern, and relevant. It answered the big questions: where did we come from? Why are we here? With a narrative that felt like a science fiction blockbuster. He was connecting the dots between ancient myth, the Bible, and the modern UFO phenomenon. The fuse that was lit in that 19th century archaeological dig has now been connected to a powder keg. Zecharia Sitchin has struck the match, and the explosion of his theory will change the way millions of people see the ancient world forever. He has given us the who alien astronauts. Now he must explain the why. And the answer lies out beyond Pluto, in the cold, dark depths of space. Mainstream scholars translate mu in various ways, depending on the context, as a name, a year, or a line of text. Sitchin disagreed. He argued that mu had a more technical meaning. He looked at depictions on cylinder seals of gods handing objects to kings, objects that mainstream scholars called symbols of kingship. Sitchin saw the word mu next to these depictions and concluded it meant a sky chamber, or more specifically, a conical individual rocket ship. A stone carving of a symbol becomes a diagram of a spaceship. A word changes from name to rocket. This is the Sitchin method in a nutshell. Find a linguistic or iconographic ambiguity and provide a technological, extraterrestrial solution. Sitchin would argue that's not the angry shout of a deity. That's the sound of a rocket engine. The tablets of destiny that gave him ultimate power, not a divine object, but perhaps a sophisticated computer, a command and control device that ran the entire Earth operation. The creation of humanity? Not a magical act of mixing clay and blood, but a deliberate scientific process of genetic engineering. His central thesis is stunning. The Anunnaki of the Sumerian myths were not gods at all. They were extraterrestrial visitors, biological beings from another world, far advanced beyond us, who came to Earth in the distant past. The Anunnaki, he argues, doesn't just mean those who from heaven to earth came. It is a literal, non-metaphorical description. They were astronauts. The stories of their celestial battles? Not myths, but accounts of wars fought with advanced weaponry in our solar system. Their incredible knowledge of astronomy? It wasn't a gift from the gods. It was their own star charts, their own navigational data, which they passed on to their primitive subjects. The quiet hum of modern life replaces the murmur of an ancient city. It is in this world that a new figure enters our story, a man who will take the clay tablets we've been exploring and crack them open in a way no one had ever thought to before. They knew about the planets in our solar system out to Saturn. They had a deep understanding of concepts like planetary retrogradation and the precession of the equinox is a celestial wobble that takes nearly 26,000 years to complete one cycle. How could a supposedly primitive civilization know these things? Mainstream archaeology suggests thousands of years of patient, naked-eye observation and meticulous record-keeping. Sitchin provides a much simpler, more dramatic answer. They were told. The Anunnaki simply showed them the map of the neighborhood. His name is Zecharia Sitchin. He is not a mainstream academic. He's a businessman, an economist by training, born in Azerbaijan and raised in what was then Palestine. But from a young age, he was fascinated by the ancient world, by the Hebrew Bible, and by the deep history of the Near East. He traces the wedge-shaped marks, the same ones the ancient scribe pressed into wet clay. But where the academic sees the word for God or deity, Sitchin sees something else. He sees a job title, an astronaut. Where the translation says sky or heavens, Sitchin reads space or the cosmos. When a god mounts his sky chariot, Sitchin sees a commander boarding his spacecraft. He is retranslating, reinterpreting, and in doing so, he is building the foundations of a theory so explosive it will create an entire new genre of speculative history. He possessed a command of several ancient languages, including Sumerian cuneiform. He was a man with a singular, obsessive passion. He looked at the work of the great scholars who had translated the tablets before him, and he felt they were missing the point. He believed their translations were handicapped by their own modern biases. They saw gods and heavens and chariots, because that's what their worldview allowed them to see. They saw metaphor and myth. Sitchin was convinced they were wrong. He believed the texts should be read not as theology, but as journalism, as a literal account of historical events. You can imagine him, late at night, a single desk lamp illuminating a replica of a cuneiform tablet. In 1976, Sitchin publishes his first and most famous book, The 12th Planet. This is the core of his argument. Every myth is a memory. A mainstream historical fact that Sitchin leverages heavily is the Sumerian seemingly impossible astronomical knowledge. Now for a quirky tidbit that perfectly illustrates Sitchin's method. Of course, this approach immediately sets him on a collision course with academia. But to the general public, the story he was weaving was incredibly compelling. You're drifting now, away from the warm, dusty Earth and into the profound cold and silence of interstellar space. The sun shrinks to a bright, distant star behind you. You float past the familiar orbits of Mars, the churning storms of Jupiter, the serene rings of Saturn. You pass Uranus and Neptune, the icy blue sentinels at the edge of our known solar system. For centuries, this was the boundary of our cosmic map. But according to Zecharia Sitchin's radical rereading of the ancient texts, you haven't reached the end of the neighborhood yet. There's another house on the block. A very, very big one. This is the linchpin of Sitchin's entire theory. He claims that the Sumerians knew our solar system had not 9, not 8, but 10 planets, counting the sun and moon as the ancients did. Sitchin reached a total of 12 celestial bodies, hence his book title. This 10th planet, the true 12th member of the solar system in his counting, was the home world of the Anunnaki. The Sumerians, he said, called it Nibiru. The name can be translated as Planet of the Crossing, a title that perfectly describes its most important and unusual characteristic. Unlike the other planets, which orbit the sun in a relatively flat, circular plane like marbles rolling on a dinner plate, Nibiru's path is different. It's a vast, sweeping, highly elliptical orbit. Imagine throwing a football in a long, high arc. For most of its journey, Nibiru travels far out into the darkness of deep space, well beyond the orbit of Pluto. But once every 3,600 years, its path brings it swinging back into the inner solar system. It crosses the orbital plane of the other planets, passing between Mars and Jupiter before arcing back out into the void. This 3,600-year period, Sitchin claims, is the Sumerian measurement known as a shar. And each time Nibiru made its fiery passage through the heart of our solar system, it was a momentous event, an opportunity for its inhabitants to interact with the other planets, including ours. Sitchin finds his evidence for Nibiru in a variety of places, most famously in the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Enuma Elish describes a colossal battle in the early solar system between the gods. The primary narrative involves the god Marduk, the champion of the new gods, fighting and defeating Tiamat, a primordial goddess representing a monstrous watery chaos. Marduk slays Tiamat, splits her body in two, and uses one half to create the sky and the other half to create the earth. He then arranges the solar system and sets the stars in their stations. For mainstream scholars, this is a powerful creation myth, a story about order emerging from chaos, and a political document designed to legitimize Babylon's rise to power by making its patron god Marduk the king of the universe. But for Sitchin, this isn't a myth. It's astrophysics. He reads the text as a celestial history. Tiamat, he says, was an ancient planet that used to exist between Mars and Jupiter. Nibiru, personified as Marduk in the later Babylonian retelling, was an invader, a rogue planet captured by our sun's gravity. As it swung into the solar system, it collided with Tiamat. The cataclysmic impact shattered Tiamat. One half of the planet was completely obliterated, becoming the asteroid belt. The other half, along with Tiamat's primary moon, was knocked into a new orbit closer to the sun. It became Earth. Our moon is the remnant of Tiamat's moon. It's an incredible cinematic story. And it provides Sitchin with a neat explanation for a few astronomical puzzles. It explains the existence of the asteroid belt. It's the debris from a planetary collision. It explains why Earth is so watery. It's the remnant of the watery monster, Tiamat. Scholars, particularly astronomers and physicists, still argue, or rather vehemently deny, the very possibility of Nibiru's existence. They point out that a planet with such a massive, eccentric orbit would create gravitational chaos, flinging the other planets out of their stable paths. Its repeated passage would have left undeniable evidence, yet there is none. Furthermore, for a planet so far from the sun to support life, it would need an internal heat source of unimaginable power to keep from being a frozen, sterile ball of ice. The theory, from a scientific standpoint, is considered a non-starter, but in the world of the theory, Nibiru is very real, and it has a problem. Here's a quirky, speculative tidbit from Sitchin's narrative. Nibiru is a dying world. Its long journey into deep space exposes it to cosmic radiation and temperature extremes. Its atmosphere, the very shield that makes life possible, is eroding. It's bleeding out into space. The brilliant scientists of Nibiru, the Anunnaki, devise a plan. They need to create a new artificial shield for their planet. The most effective material for this, they calculate, would be a fine powder of suspended gold particles, which would reflect heat and light, stabilizing their planet's climate. Gold, the one substance that has driven human desire for millennia. The Anunnaki need it. They need a lot of it. They scan the solar system, and their survey points them to one promising source, the seventh planet, counting from the outside, the blue-hued remnant of the Great Collision. Earth. So, the stage is set for an expedition. Approximately 450,000 years ago, as Nibiru's orbit brought it closer to us, a mission was launched. A crew of Anunnaki astronauts, led by commanders like Enki, journeyed in their spacecraft from their dying world to ours. They weren't coming to be worshipped. They weren't coming to enlighten primitive hominids out of the goodness of their hearts. They were on a mining expedition, a desperate, long-term industrial project to save their home. They splashed down in the Persian Gulf and established their first base, Eridu, which in Sumerian means home in the faraway. The gods had arrived, and they were rolling up their sleeves, ready to get to work. The Anunnaki have landed. Their ships have sliced through Earth's atmosphere, and their feet now stand on terrestrial soil for the first time. You can almost feel the strange gravity, taste the oxygen-rich air, so different from their home world. Of Nibiru, they are pioneers, but they are not explorers in the romantic sense. They are here for one reason and one reason only, the reason that has driven empires and broken nations throughout our own history: gold. Not for jewelry, not for currency, but for survival. Their entire mission is predicated on extracting vast quantities of this precious metal to save their ailing planet. Their leader, Enki, the brilliant scientist and engineer, establishes their first settlement, Eridu, near the shores of the Persian Gulf. It's a strategic location. They need water for their operations, and they have a plan to get the gold from the waters of the Gulf itself. The initial mission seems straightforward, if laborious. They will use their advanced technology to filter the seawater and extract the dissolved gold particles. But the yields are disappointing. It's too slow, too inefficient. The amount of gold they are collecting is a mere drop in the cosmic bucket compared to what they need to shield Nibiru's atmosphere. The pressure is on. Back home, their world is still dying. A new plan is needed. The Anunnaki leadership holds a council. They've done geological surveys of this new planet, and their data points to a far richer source of gold. Not in the water, but in the earth. Deep veins of it, located in a region of southern Africa they call the Abzu. In the standard Sumerian myth, the Abzu is Enki's watery domain, a kind of subterranean freshwater sea. In Sitchin's reinterpretation, the Abzu is a geographical location, southern Africa, and the waters are the deep, rich gold mines. This makes Enki not the lord of a mythical abyss, but the head of the African mining operation. So, the focus of the mission shifts. The Anunnaki pack up their primary operations and move. Imagine the scene: great ships lifting off from the shores of the Persian Gulf and descending into the mineral-rich landscapes of what would one day be Zimbabwe and South Africa. This is a massive undertaking. They have to set up a whole new infrastructure: mining facilities, processing plants, living quarters, and the work is brutal. It's deep earth mining, dangerous, dirty, and physically exhausting. Remember the story of the Igigi, the lesser gods, who rebelled after 40 shars of digging canals in Mesopotamia. Well, now they're being sent to the mines in Africa, and they are not happy about it. For thousands and thousands of years, the rank and file Anunnaki toil in the African mines. They operate the machinery, they blast the rock, they haul the ore. But just like before, resentment begins to simmer. They didn't travel across the solar system for this. They are sophisticated, intelligent beings, and this is backbreaking. Manual labor. The grumbling starts again, echoing the ancient myth of the Igigi rebellion. A mutiny is brewing in the gold mines. This is where Sitchin makes a fascinating connection to real-world archaeology. It is a mainstream historical fact that incredibly ancient mines have been discovered in southern Africa. At sites like the Ngwinya mine in Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, archaeologists have found evidence of sophisticated mining activity dating back at least 43,000 years. The primary mineral being extracted was hematite, an iron ore used to create red ochre pigment. Mainstream science says early humans used this for body paint, ritual, and art. Sitchin, however, asks, were they mining just for pigment? He suggests these ancient mines are far older and are, in fact, the very mines of the Anunnaki. He points to research by some archaeologists who suggest mining could date back 100,000 years or more. For Sitchin, these aren't the quarries of primitive men. They are the abandoned industrial sites of our alien forefathers. The mutiny in the mines finally reaches its breaking point. Just as the myths describe, the Anunnaki miners throw down their tools. They march from the African mines all the way to Mesopotamia, where the command center is, and they surround Enlil's headquarters. The scene plays out just as the Atrahasis epic described: the siege, the burning of tools, the terrified leadership. Enlil wants to punish the mutineers, but Enki, the clever scientist who is also their supervisor in the mines, understands their plight. A new solution is needed. They can't force the Anunnaki back to work. They can't abandon the mission. They need a new workforce. And here's a quirky fringe tidbit that Sitchin's followers often point to. They look at the sheer obsession humans have with gold. It's not a particularly useful industrial metal compared to iron or copper. It's soft, it's rare. So why has it been the ultimate store of value and object of desire for virtually every culture on Earth? The theory provides a spooky answer. Our reverence for gold is a kind of genetic memory, an echo of our Creator's ultimate purpose. The Anunnaki wanted gold above all else, and they programmed their creation us with that same desire, so we would continue to mine it for them. A chilling thought that our deepest desires for wealth might not even be our own. The council of the gods is at an impasse. The mining operation, the key to their survival, has failed. They are facing a crisis. Academics still debate whether the Sumerian myths of divine rebellion are purely metaphorical, representing a shift in the pantheon or social order, or if they recall a genuine historical event, like a revolt of a priest class or a war between city-states. For Sitchin, the debate is moot. It was a real event, and it was the catalyst for their most audacious plan yet. Enki stands before the council and announces his solution. They don't need to find new workers. They need to make them. He has been studying the local wildlife on this planet. He's particularly interested in a primitive but promising hominid species that is already evolving in Africa, Homo erectus. They are upright. They use simple tools. They have potential. The raw materials are already here. All they need is a little bit of a divine upgrade. The decision has been made. The Anunnaki mining operation is stalled. The mutiny has succeeded, and a new disposable workforce is required. Enki, the chief scientist, steps into his laboratory. But this is not a lab of bubbling beakers and glass. Tubes. This is a facility of unimaginable biological technology. Your imagination drifts to this place, this sterile, humming environment in the heart of Africa, a place the Sumerians called the Edin, which means the abode of the righteous ones. Sitchin sees the name and immediately connects it to the biblical Garden of Eden. Not a paradise garden, but a high-tech biogenetics research center. Enki's proposal is radical. He will take an existing, native creature of Earth, a hominid, what we would now call Homo erectus, and upgrade it. He will combine its DNA with the DNA of the Anunnaki themselves. The goal is to create a hybrid being, a primitive worker or Lulu Amelu, as the texts say. This new creature will be intelligent enough to understand orders and perform complex tasks like mining, but servile enough not to rebel. It will be a perfect biological robot, a slave species designed to relieve the Anunnaki of their burden. This is Sitchin's explanation for the story of creation. The clay of the earth is the genetic material of the early hominid. The blood of the god is the DNA of the Anunnaki. The mixing is not a magical act, but a process of in vitro fertilization and genetic engineering. The texts describe the process with fascinating, and to Sitchin, clinical detail. Enki is not alone. He is assisted by Ninhursag, the chief medical officer, the mother goddess we met earlier. In Sitchin's telling, she is a brilliant geneticist. The texts name a host of other birth goddesses who assist her. Sitchin sees them not as deities, but as nurses and lab technicians. Their first attempts are failures. The texts of Enki and Ninma, which we touched on before, list the creation of flawed beings, one with trembling hands, one who cannot speak, one who is infertile. A mainstream reading sees this as a myth explaining human disabilities. Sitchin sees it as a logbook of failed genetic experiments, a record of trial and error in the lab as they struggled to get the DNA sequence right. You can picture the frustration in the lab test tubes or their alien equivalent being thrown in the trash. Enki and Ninhursag arguing over the correct gene splicing technique. Finally, they achieve a breakthrough. They have a viable embryo. They have successfully combined the genes of a god and an ant-man. But they need a surrogate mother. An Anunnaki female must carry this hybrid creature to term. Ninhursag herself announces, "I have created it. My hands have made it." But the texts say she turns to her husband Enki, and his wife, Ninki, provides the vessel. She becomes the first surrogate. After a tense period of waiting, a successful birth is achieved. The first Adamu, the first earthling, is born. He is a perfect hybrid. He is the prototype. Now they need to mass-produce this new worker. They can't have their own females acting as surrogates for an entire slave race. That's inefficient and undignified. So, they use the genetic material of the first perfect human, the Adamu, to create his female counterpart. The Eve of this story, Tiamat, a name Sitchin connects to Mother of Life, not the chaos monster. Then, using their cells, they clone them. The 14 birth goddesses are now given the fertilized eggs of the human hybrids, and they serve as the surrogates for the first batch of mass-produced workers. 7 male and 7 female primitive workers are born. They are sterile mules. Unable to procreate on their own, the Anunnaki want to control the population, to manufacture workers as needed, not to have them breeding out of control. A mainstream historical fact that becomes central to this part of the theory is the missing link in human evolution. While the fossil record is much more complete now than in Sitchin's time, the sudden leap in brain capacity and cultural complexity from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens is still a point of intense study. For paleontologists, this was the result of gradual evolutionary pressures over hundreds of thousands of years. For Sitchin, there is no missing link. There is a missing lab. The leap was not natural. It was artificial. The Anunnaki simply jumped the gun on evolution, pushing Homo erectus forward by millions of years in a single genetic manipulation. Here's a quirky fringe detail that has captivated followers of this theory. It relates to a specific genetic disorder called hypertrichosis, sometimes known as werewolf syndrome, where a person grows thick hair all over their face and body. Believers in the ancient astronaut theory sometimes point to this as a kind of genetic throwback, a resurfacing of our more primitive hominid DNA from before the Anunnaki cleaned up our genome. It's pure speculation, of course, but it's an example of how this theory seeks to explain modern anomalies by rooting them in our supposed alien past. The new workforce is a success. The Lulu are strong, they are obedient, and they are sent to the mines in Africa and the gardens in Mesopotamia to take over the work. The Anunnaki can finally relax. The gold starts flowing again, processed and shipped off-world to Nibiru. But there's a problem that Enki, the clever scientist, didn't anticipate, and it has nothing to do with genetics. It has to do with desire. The texts describe the Anunnaki, particularly the younger ones stationed on Earth, looking upon the daughters of man. They find them attractive. And despite strict orders against it, some of them begin to interbreed with the hybrid humans. This is Sitchin's interpretation of the biblical passage. In Genesis 6, the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took the wives of all which they chose. This unauthorized crossbreeding creates a new problem. The offspring of these unions are fully reproductive. The Anunnaki have lost control of their experiment. Humans are now breeding on their own, multiplying rapidly. And Enlil, the stern commander who never liked this whole create a slave idea in the first place, is absolutely furious. The planet is being overrun by these creatures. They are noisy, they are unruly, and they are a direct violation of his orders. Historians still debate whether the biblical story of the Nephilim, sons of God, breeding with daughters of men, was a memory of a conquered tribe being absorbed, a cautionary tale against intermarriage with foreigners, or a mythological fragment from a much older story. For Sitchin, it's a literal account of the Anunnaki breaking quarantine. And for Enlil, it is the last straw. This human experiment has been a disaster from the start. It's time to wipe the slate clean. The Earth is teeming. The human population, no longer constrained by the Anunnaki's sterile manufacturing process, is exploding. They are breeding, spreading, and building. From the Anunnaki perspective, especially that of the stern commander, Enlil, the experiment is a catastrophic failure. The plan was to create a controlled workforce, not a new, independent civilization. The texts describe Enlil's mounting frustration. He complains that the noise of humanity has become unbearable. He can't sleep. The clamor of their lives, their struggles, their sheer numbers, grate on his divine nerves. Sitchin reads this not as a complaint about noise, but about chaos. A project has spun out of control. Enlil sees this burgeoning race as a contamination, a threat to the integrity of their mission. He decides on a final, brutal solution: extermination. He won't just call the population. He will eradicate it completely. He will wipe the planet clean of this failed experiment and start over. But he can't just unleash his superweapons. The Anunnaki have laws, and a planetary genocide might be a bit of a PR problem back on Nibiru. He needs a cover story. He needs plausible deniability. And he knows that a perfect opportunity is on the horizon. A natural catastrophe of immense proportions. The Anunnaki, with their advanced knowledge of orbital mechanics and geophysics, are aware of a looming disaster. A massive ice sheet in Antarctica has become unstable. As Nibiru makes its next cyclical passage through the inner solar system, its immense gravitational pull will be the final nudge. It will cause this colossal ice sheet to slip into the ocean, triggering a tidal wave of unimaginable scale, a global flood, the deluge. It's an event that will wipe out almost all life on the planet. Enlil sees this not as a tragedy to be averted, but as an opportunity to be exploited. He presents his plan to the Anunnaki Council. Do nothing. Let the flood happen. Let nature do the dirty work. He makes all the Anunnaki swear an oath of secrecy. They are forbidden from warning the humans of their impending doom. This is where the story of the Great Flood, a tale that appears in hundreds of cultures around the world, gets its Anunnaki twist. The mainstream historical fact is that the flood myth is most famously recorded in the biblical story of Noah, but that story is a direct descendant of a much older Mesopotamian version found in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic. In these versions, the hero is not Noah, but Utnapishtim or Atrahasis. The gods, angered by humanity's noise, decide to send a flood. It's a striking parallel that shows the deep historical roots of the biblical narrative. Mainstream science suggests these myths may be exaggerated memories of real, catastrophic regional floods that occurred as the last ice age ended and sea levels rose dramatically, inundating coastal communities in the Persian Gulf and Black Sea regions. But in Sitchin's telling, it's a global event and a deliberate act of passive genocide. The council agrees to Enlil's plan. The Anunnaki will save themselves by boarding their spacecraft, their sky ships, and waiting out the flood from orbit. They will simply watch as their creation is washed away. But one god cannot abide by this decision. Enki, the scientist, the one who created humanity in the first place. He has a soft spot for his creation. He feels responsible. He is bound by the oath he swore to the other gods, so he cannot warn humanity directly. But Enki, ever the trickster, finds a loophole. He goes to the hut of his favorite human, the wise and righteous man Utnapishtim, or Noah in the later version. He doesn't speak to the man directly, as that would violate his oath. Instead, he speaks to the wall of the hut. Read hut, read hut. Wall, wall. He proclaims, listen to my words. Demolish your house, build a boat. Forsake possessions, can save your life. He gives Utnapishtim precise technical specifications for the boat. Not a simple wooden ark, in Sitchin's view, but a submersible vessel, a submarine. He provides the exact dimensions, the number of decks, the need for it to be sealed tight with bitumen and pitch. He is giving his human servant the blueprint for a craft that can survive the unimaginable pressures and turbulence of a global tsunami. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In some versions of the myth, Enki also instructs his hero to take aboard the seed of all living things. This is often pictured as a clumsy parade of animals walking 2 by 2 up a ramp. Sitchin saw this differently. Why would an advanced race bother with hauling giraffes and hippos onto a boat? He proposed that Enki didn't command Utnapishtim to save the animals themselves, but their genetic essence. He was told to collect DNA, samples, the seed of life, perhaps in the form of frozen embryos or tissue samples, could be used to repopulate the earth after the cataclysm. The ark was not just a lifeboat. It was a floating genetic seed bank. The day of the deluge arrives. The Anunnaki retreat to their orbiting spacecraft. From their vantage point in the heavens, they watch as the catastrophe unfolds. The texts describe a terrifying scene. A wall of water sweeps across the land. The darkness is total, the destruction absolute, but the story takes a surprising turn. The gods are horrified. Even the fierce goddess Inanna Ishtar weeps at the destruction. The olden days have alas turned to clay, she cries, watching the world of her human worshippers get obliterated. They are huddled in their ships, cowering like dogs. They didn't anticipate the sheer emotional horror of watching a world die. They had created life, and now they were watching it be extinguished. It's a moment of divine regret. When the waters finally subside, Utnapishtim's vessel comes to rest on a mountaintop. He sends out a bird, just as in the Bible, to see if the land is dry. When the Anunnaki see that a remnant of humanity has survived, their reaction is mixed. Enlil is enraged. He lands his ship and storms towards Utnapishtim, demanding to know who broke the oath, who allowed a human to escape. He bellows. Enki steps forward and confesses. He argues with his brother, convincing him that humanity is worth saving. He makes a new pact. Humanity will be allowed to live, to procreate, to thrive again, but they will be different. The Anunnaki grant Utnapishtim and his wife immortality, or, in Sitchin's terms, extreme longevity through their advanced medical technology. But they make changes to the human race. They shorten our lifespan, introduce hardship and disease. They will allow us to exist, but they will ensure we never become a threat again. Historians still debate whether the Mesopotamian flood story is a tale of divine punishment or one of divine salvation, a story about the gods' wrath or their ultimate mercy. For Sitchin, it is neither. It is the story of a cover-up, a foiled genocide, and a deeply dysfunctional cosmic family fighting over their most controversial science project. The waters have receded. The world is washed clean, a blank slate of mud and debris. The human race, saved from the brink of extinction by Enki's clever disobedience, begins anew from the genetic stock of the Ark's survivors. The Anunnaki descend from their orbiting ships, their feet touching a world that is both familiar and irrevocably changed. The gold mining operation that started it all must be rebuilt. The cities must be re-established, and a new social order must be imposed upon the surviving and now proliferating human population. The Anunnaki can no longer rule directly as they did before the flood. There are too many humans, and their own numbers are limited. They need a new system of control. They need middlemen. They need kings. This is Sitchin's explanation for the dawn of kingship. It wasn't a natural evolution of human social structures. It was a deliberate political system designed by the Anunnaki to manage humanity on their behalf. They would bestow power upon a select few human rulers, creating a buffer class between themselves and the general populace. The king would be the go-between, the foreman of the human farm. This new era of governance is meticulously recorded in one of the most enigmatic and controversial documents ever unearthed from the Yahweh. Mesopotamian science. The Sumerian king list. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Sumerian king list exists. It is a collection of clay tablets and cylinders that purports to list all the rulers of Sumer, the cities they ruled from, and the length of their reigns. It begins with a simple declarative statement. When kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. This line alone is a bombshell for an ancient astronaut theorist. Kingship wasn't invented. It was lowered from heaven. A gift from the Anunnaki. The list then proceeds to detail the reigns of the first kings, the ones who ruled before the Great Flood, and the numbers are staggering. Lulling, the first king of Eridu, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alongar, ruled for 36,000 years. The list continues like this, with 8 kings and 5 cities ruling for a combined total of 241,200 years. Then, the list states bluntly, the flood swept over. After the flood, the list continues, kingship was again lowered from heaven. This time to the city of Kish. The reigns of these post-flood kings are still incredibly long. The first king of Kish ruled for 1,200 years, but they are significantly shorter than the pre-flood reigns. As the list progresses through different dynasties and centuries, the lifespans of the kings become progressively shorter and more realistic, eventually settling into normal human terms. For mainstream historians, the Sumerian king list is a fascinating but problematic document. Scholars still debate whether it is a genuine historical record, a work of political propaganda designed to create a sense of a single, unified Sumerian history under a specific king, or a blend of myth and reality. The impossibly long reigns of the early kings are generally dismissed as mythological, a common feature in ancient cultures to create a sense of a distant, golden age when heroes and gods walked the earth. The number 36,000, for instance, is 10 times the Anunnaki Shar of 3,600, perhaps a symbolic number rather than a literal one. But for Zecharia Sitchin, there is no myth. He reads the list literally. The pre-flood kings with their tens of thousands of year reigns? They weren't humans. They were the Anunnaki themselves, ruling directly over the pre-flood earth. An Anunnaki year of rulership might be different, or perhaps their lifespans on their home planet of Nibiru were simply that long. A 241,200-year period of their rule is a direct calculation of their time on earth before the deluge. After the flood, the new kings with their still very long but reduced lifespans were the first human Anunnaki hybrids. These were the demigods of legend, like the great hero Gilgamesh, who is on the list as a king of Uruk. He was said to be 2/3 god and 1/3 man. His long but not quite immortal lifespan reflects his hybrid genetics. As time went on, the divine bloodline diluted, and the lifespans of the kings shrank until they were fully human. The king list, for Sitchin, is not a myth. It is a genetic chart, tracking the diminishing influence of Anunnaki DNA in the ruling class. And here's a quirky fringe tidbit that connects this to a more familiar story. The incredibly long lifespans of the pre-flood rulers in the Sumerian king list have a direct parallel in the Bible. The book of Genesis lists the patriarchs from Adam to Noah. Adam lived to be 930 years old. Seth lived to 912. Methuselah, the most famous, lived to be 969. After the flood, the lifespans mentioned in the Bible also begin to decrease dramatically. Abraham lived to 175, Moses to 120. Sitchin and his followers see this as direct corroboration. The Bible, they argue, is simply preserving a different edited version of the same historical data recorded by the Sumerians. The long-lived patriarchs were the same demigod rulers from the Anunnaki bloodline. The system of kingship, therefore, was the Anunnaki's primary method of post-flood control. They would provide the human kings with knowledge of law, agriculture, astronomy, and technology. They would arm their chosen city-states and direct them in wars against rival cities. The constant warfare between Sumerian city-states, which historians see as a struggle for land and water rights, is reframed by Sitchin as a series of proxy wars between different Anunnaki factions. The humans were merely pawns on a cosmic chessboard, fighting battles for their divine masters. The king was not just a ruler. He was the priest, the sacred conduit to the gods, the only one who could communicate directly with the Anunnaki commanders. And scattered throughout the art and artifacts these new kingdoms produced, Sitchin believed he could see the evidence of their technological masters everywhere. The new world order is in place. Kingship, lowered from heaven, now governs humanity. The Anunnaki have retreated from the day-to-day management of the planet, preferring to operate from their high-tech command centers or from orbit. But their presence, Sitchin argues, is everywhere, hidden in plain sight. It's encoded in the art, the architecture, and the religious symbols of the Sumerians. You just have to know how to look. You have to be willing to see a rocket ship where others see a tall stone, or a helicopter where others see a mythical beast. This is the part of the journey where we become art critics, poring over ancient artifacts for telltale signs of advanced technology. Your focus shifts to the cylinder seals. These are small, intricately carved stone cylinders, a uniquely Mesopotamian invention. It is a mainstream historical fact that these seals were used as personal signatures. A person would roll the cylinder over a wet clay tablet, leaving behind a long rectangular impression that was their unique mark, a complex scene of gods, humans, and animals. They were used to sign contracts, seal containers, and mark property. Thousands of these seals and their impressions have been found, and they are a treasure trove of information about Sumerian life, religion, and mythology. They are tiny windows into the ancient mind. For an archaeologist, these scenes are purely symbolic. A god sitting on a throne represents divine authority. A figure with wings denotes a celestial being or a spirit. A star in the sky represents the heavens or a specific deity. But you are now looking with Sitchin's eyes. You unroll one seal impression. The scene shows two figures tending to a central plant. Above it floats a familiar symbol, a winged disk. Mainstream scholars identify this as a symbol of the sun god, Utu Shamash, or the supreme god Ashur in later Assyrian art. It's a representation of divinity and celestial power. Sitchin looks at the same image and says, "That's not a symbol. That's a machine." He sees the wings not as bird-like appendages, but as aerodynamic structures. He sees the central disk not as the sun, but as a cockpit or command module. For him, the winged disk is a literal depiction of an Anunnaki spacecraft in flight, perhaps a small shuttle or atmospheric flyer. You look at another artifact, a famous wall relief from the palace of an Assyrian king. It depicts what appear to be winged supernatural beings, often called genies or apkallu. They have the bodies of men, but the heads and wings of eagles. They are holding objects. One object is a small bucket or pail. The other looks like a pinnacone. For Assyriologists, this is a clear religious scene. The winged figures are divine spirits, and they are performing a ritual of purification or magical protection, using the cone to sprinkle holy water from the bucket. Scholars still debate the exact meaning of this ritual, whether it is about purification, fertility, or anointing the king with divine power. But its symbolic nature is rarely questioned. Sitchin, of course, questions it. He sees the pinnacone and wonders if it's a technological device, perhaps some kind of remote control or weapon. He looks at the bucket and asks if it's a container for a biological sample or a power source. He looks at the winged genie and sees not a mythical being, but an Anunnaki astronaut in his flight suit or uniform, complete with eagle-headed helmet and winged pack. The entire religious ritual becomes a scene of technological or biological procedure. The search for ancient tech continues. You examine carvings that show gods holding strange staffs or rod-like objects. Are these symbols of power, or are they advanced tools? Weapons? The famous rod and ring symbol, often depicted being given by a god to a king, is seen by mainstream scholars as a bundle of measuring reeds and a coiled rope, symbols of a ruler's duty to build and maintain justice and order in his kingdom. Sitchin and his followers suggest they might be advanced scientific instruments or even weapons, bestowed upon a human ruler by his alien master. Then there are the descriptions in the texts themselves. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes how the hero travels to meet the flood survivor Utnapishtim in a land far away. To get there, he must pass through a mountain pass guarded by scorpion men. The pass opens and closes, and he must race through it. Sitchin interprets this not as a mythical journey, but as Gilgamesh traveling to an Anunnaki spaceport. The scorpion men are not monsters, but guards in some kind of robotic or mechanical suits. The mountain that opens and closes is not a magical passage, but a blast door or security gate for the launch facility. The story of the god Zu, who stole the tablets of destiny from Enlil, is described as a high-speed chase through the heavens. Mainstream scholars see a myth about the theft of divine power. Sitchin sees an aerial dogfight between two spacecraft, one of the most quirky and specific tidbits of this ancient tech. Hunt involves the story of Inanna's descent into the underworld. In the myth, she must pass through 7 gates, and at each gate, she is forced to remove an item of clothing or jewelry until she is naked. Scholars see this as a deeply symbolic journey of shedding worldly power to face death. Sitchin, however, reads it as a description of a pilot or astronaut passing through a series of security airlocks. The 7 items she removes: her crown, her earrings, her necklace are not jewelry, but pieces of her flight equipment, her helmet, her communication device, her power suit components. The myth becomes a checklist for disembarking a spacecraft. Carving every myth, every symbol is re-examined through this technological lens. The ziggurats, those great stepped pyramids, not just temples, but launch platforms or guidance towers for incoming and outgoing spacecraft. The myths of gods flying in whirlwinds or fiery chariots. Not poetic descriptions, but eyewitness accounts of advanced aircraft. The entire artistic and religious output of Mesopotamia is transformed into a vast, scattered technical manual, a collection of faded photographs of a forgotten technological age. The gods are no longer in their heavens. They are in their hangars, polishing their ships, ready for the next flight. For a long time, you've been immersed in this incredible, all-encompassing narrative. You've seen ancient myths transformed into historical records, gods into astronauts, and religious symbols into technical diagrams. It's a compelling, internally consistent world. But now, the lights in the speculative theater are slowly coming up, and a different group of people is entering the room. They are not carrying laser weapons and genetic sequencers. They are armed with dictionaries, grammar, books, and peer-reviewed papers. The mainstream academic world, which had largely ignored Sitchin's work as fringe fantasy, begins to respond. And their response is not a debate. It's a takedown. A systematic, methodical dismantling of the entire theory, starting with its very foundation, the words themselves. The first and most devastating critique comes from the linguists, the Sumerologists and Assyriologists, who have dedicated their lives to the painstaking work of translating cuneiform. They look at Sitchin's translations and, to put it mildly, they are not impressed. They argue that Sitchin plays fast and loose with the language, demonstrating a fundamental misunderstanding of its grammar, syntax, and vocabulary. Remember his translation of Anunnaki as those who from heaven to earth came? Mainstream scholars point out this is simply incorrect. Anu is the sky god. Ki means earth, but the grammatical construction doesn't support his specific directional translation. A more accepted translation is something like princely offspring, or those of royal blood, referring to their place in the divine hierarchy, not their point of origin. And what about his key evidence for rocket ships, the word Mu? Scholars argue that Sitchin's claim that Mu means sky chamber is entirely fabricated. They point to thousands of texts where Mu clearly means name, year, or line, based on overwhelming contextual evidence. To make it mean rocket ship, Sitchin had to ignore its meaning in 99.9% of cases and apply his new definition only where it fit his theory, often next to a picture he had already decided was a rocket. It's a classic case of circular reasoning. He interprets the picture as a rocket because the text says Mu, and he translates Mu as rocket because the picture looks like one. For academics, this isn't scholarship. It's a word game. The critique moves from language to astronomy. Sitchin's entire theory hinges on the existence of Nibiru, a massive planet on a 3,600-year elliptical orbit. Astronomers, like the late Carl Sagan, step in to explain the profound physical problems with this idea. It is a mainstream scientific fact that the gravitational forces in our solar system are a delicate, balanced dance. Introducing a new massive planet on such a bizarre orbit would not be a quiet event. Its gravity would wreak havoc. It would have ejected the Earth or Mars from the solar system entirely, or sent them crashing into the sun. The asteroid belt shows no evidence of being the remnant of a single large watery planet. And the idea of a life-bearing planet existing in the frozen darkness of deep space for 99% of its orbit, only to swing by a hot star, defies all known principles of biology and planetary science. There is no evidence for Nibiru in the sky, and no room for it in the laws of physics. Then there's the archaeology. What about those ancient African gold mines dating back 100,000 years? Archaeologists confirm the age of the sites, but they also confirm what was being mined: pigment for paint. They point to the discovery of early human art and burials from the same period that used this red ochre. The evidence points to symbolic, ritualistic human behavior, not an alien industrial operation. Sitchin's claim that they were Anunnaki gold mines is an assertion with no supporting evidence beyond his own interpretation. The mainstream explanation fits the available data perfectly. And the art? The rockets and helicopters? Art historians and archaeologists patiently explain the principles of symbolism and stylization. Ancient artists weren't trying to create photorealistic images. A winged disc is a widespread symbol of power and divinity found from Egypt to Mesopotamia, evolving over thousands of years. It combines the ideas of the sun, the disc, and the heavens, the wings, into a compact, powerful symbol. To see it as a literal machine is to misunderstand the very nature of ancient art. A quirky tidbit of academic rebuttal is what's sometimes called the ancient lawnmower problem. If you show a modern lawnmower to someone from a pre-industrial culture, they wouldn't know what it is. If they drew it, they might render it as a snarling beast with spinning teeth. 1,000 years later, a theorist could claim it's a monster. The academics argue Sitchin is doing the reverse. He's looking at a symbolic monster and insisting it must be a lawnmower. The core of the academic critique is that Sitchin's method is fundamentally unscientific. He starts with the conclusion aliens visited Earth in the past, and then works backward, cherry-picking, reinterpreting, and often mistranslating evidence to fit that conclusion. Anything that contradicts his theory is ignored. Anything that can be twisted to support it is presented as a smoking gun. This is the opposite of the scientific method, where you form a hypothesis and then try your best to disprove it with evidence. The Sumerian king list and its 241,200-year reigns, scholars see it as clear evidence of a mythological, not historical, mindset. The Sumerians weren't writing history as we know it. They were creating a foundational story for their culture. The Bible's long-lived patriarchs, a common feature in origin stories to lend gravity and a sense of a lost golden age to the narrative, the flood, a powerful, terrifying, and very real local event or series of events that seared itself into the cultural memory of people living in a land defined by two unpredictable rivers. The mainstream explanations don't require rewriting all of physics, biology, linguistics, and archaeology. They are simpler, and they are supported by a mountain of converging evidence. The Anunnaki of Sitchin's world begin to fade, replaced by the gods of the Sumerians as they likely saw them, as powerful, capricious forces of nature and society, personified in epic tales that help them make sense of a difficult and mysterious world. The academic takedown is complete. The foundations of Sitchin's theory, the mistranslations, the astronomical impossibilities, the misinterpreted art have been systematically dismantled. The grand technological edifice of alien miners and genetic labs seems to crumble, leaving behind the original artifacts, the clay tablets, the cylinder seals, the epic poems. So if the Anunnaki weren't astronauts from Nibiru, who were they? If the myths aren't garbled history, then what are they? You're back in the position of the original 19th century archaeologists, brushing the dust off the tablets, but now armed with a century of scholarship. We must now explore the more grounded, less interstellar explanations for these powerful and enduring stories. The most straightforward interpretation is the one we started with. The Anunnaki were to the Sumerians simply gods. The stories were their religion, their theology. They were attempts to answer the fundamental questions of existence. Why are we here? Why does the river flood? Why do kings rule? Why is life so hard? The creation of humanity from clay to serve the gods isn't a lab report. It's a powerful theological statement about the relationship between humanity and the divine. It instills a sense of purpose, service, and explains hardship. It's our lot in life. It's a mainstream historical fact that most ancient cultures had myths that justified their social structures. The Hindu caste system, for example, is rooted in the story of the cosmic man Purusha, whose body parts formed the different social classes. The Sumerian creation myth does the same thing. It explains why the priests and kings are on top and the common folk are at the bottom, working the fields. It's a divine mandate for the status quo. Another powerful interpretation is that the gods are personifications of nature. Enlil, the lord of the air, isn't a grumpy commander. He is the wind and the storm. When Enlil is angry, devastating storms sweep down from the Zagros Mountains and destroy the crops. The myth is a way to understand and personalize the terrifying, impersonal forces of the natural world. Enki, the lord of the earth and god of the sweet waters of the Abzu, is the life-giving fresh water that bubbles up from the ground and fills the rivers and canals. He is the force of irrigation, of cleverness, of the technology that makes the land fertile. The constant struggle between the brothers Enlil and Enki, a central theme in the mythology, is the eternal struggle of Mesopotamian life, the violent, unpredictable storm versus the controlled, life-sustaining irrigation. The flood story, in this light, is the ultimate victory of the storm god, a cataclysmic event where nature overwhelms human ingenuity. Beyond nature, the myths can be read as political allegory. Historians still debate whether the Enuma Elish, the story of Marduk's victory over Tiamat, is a story about a planetary collision or something far more terrestrial. The prevailing theory is that it's a piece of political propaganda. In the older Sumerian pantheon, Enlil was the king of the Alul, gods. But when the city of Babylon rose to become the dominant power in Mesopotamia, its priests needed to justify this shift. So they wrote a new epic, the Enuma Elish, in which their local city god Marduk becomes the hero who saves the universe. He defeats the old gods or monsters and is crowned the new king of the pantheon, taking over Enlil's titles and powers. The story isn't about planets, it's about earthly politics. It's a divine reflection of Babylon's military and cultural conquest of the region. Our god is the boss now, the story says, and here's the epic tale to prove it. Many of the stories may also be euhemerized history. Euhemerism is the idea that myths are exaggerated accounts of real historical events and figures. Perhaps the gods were not aliens, but simply the memory of powerful human kings, heroes, and inventors from the distant past. A king who founded a city, established its laws, and built a great ziggurat could, over centuries of storytelling, be transformed from a great man into a god. The story of Inanna, who schemed to get the sacred the tablets containing all the arts of civilization from the god Enki by getting him drunk, is a perfect example. A quirky tidbit of a myth that can be read this way. Is it a story about a goddess tricking a god? Or is it a mythologized memory of how the city of Uruk, Inanna's city, managed to steal or culturally appropriate key technologies and social structures from the older, more established city of Eridu, Enki's city? The myth explains a real world power shift in a more entertaining and memorable package. So where does this leave us? We have a collection of stories that are at once a religion, a science, a history, and a political playbook. They personify nature, justify social order, and record the memory of great leaders and intercity rivalries. This explanation is, in many ways, far more complex than the alien theory. It suggests that the Sumerians were not passive recipients of advanced knowledge, but were instead active creators of a rich and sophisticated worldview. They were observing their world, the floods, the stars, the political struggles, and weaving that reality into a magnificent tapestry of myth. Interpretation also gives the Sumerians their agency back. They are not primitive ape men being manipulated by aliens. They are the brilliant innovators who invented writing to keep track of their world, who studied the stars to understand the seasons, and who created complex mythologies to explore the very nature of their existence. The Sumerian miracle wasn't an alien intervention. It was a human achievement, an explosion of cultural and intellectual creativity born from the unique environmental and social conditions of the Fertile Crescent. The Anunnaki were not from another planet. They were from the rich, fertile soil of the human imagination. But this rational academic view is not the only legacy that survives. The seed planted by Sitchin found fertile ground too, and it would grow into a strange and powerful cultural phenomenon. The academic debate fades into the background, a quiet murmur in a university library. But out in the wider world, the story of the Anunnaki as alien visitors is not fading at all. It's escaping the confines of Sitchin's books and beginning a new life, a kind of digital folklore spreading through the burgeoning ecosystems of the internet, television, and popular culture. The theory is just too good, too cinematic, to be confined to footnotes and scholarly journals. It's a modern myth in the making, and it's about to go viral. You find yourself channel surfing in the early 2010s. You click past a cooking show, a sitcom, and land on a cable history channel. A dramatic voice declares, "Ancient monuments of impossible precision. Advanced astronomical knowledge that shouldn't exist." Could the clues lie not in our history books, but in the stars? This is the world of Ancient Aliens, the television show that took Sitchin's ideas blended them with the work of Erich von Däniken, Chariots of the Gods, and turned them into a global media phenomenon. The show became the primary vehicle for popularizing the Anunnaki theory for a new generation. Every episode presents a historical or archaeological puzzle, dismisses the mainstream explanation as inadequate, and then asks the leading question, could it have been aliens? The Anunnaki become recurring characters in this new televised mythology. The Sumerian king list is presented as undeniable proof of alien lifespans. Cylinder seals showing strange figures are displayed as diagrams of extraterrestrial encounters. The genetic engineering of humanity is presented not as a wild theory, but as a plausible alternative to both evolution and creationism. The show perfects a formula of dramatic reenactments, speculative questions, and interviews with enthusiastic proponents of the theory. It's a mainstream historical fact that ancient aliens became one of the History Channel's most popular and long-running series, demonstrating a massive public appetite for these alternative narratives. It successfully transformed a fringe theory into prime-time entertainment. From television, the Anunnaki invade the internet. They become the stars of countless YouTube videos, podcasts, and late-night forum discussions. Here, the theory evolves and mutates. It gets mixed with other conspiracy theories, creating a kind of grand unified theory of everything hidden. They, Anunnaki, are no longer just ancient miners. They are now connected to the Illuminati, the reptilians, the Hollow Earth theory. Did they leave? Or are they still here, secretly controlling world governments? Sitchin's original narrative, which was at least based on his flawed reading of specific texts, becomes a launchpad for pure, untethered speculation. It's a game of connecting dots, where the lines are drawn between any 2 points the theorist finds interesting. A strange stock market fluctuation? The Anunnaki are manipulating the gold price. A new tech company is founded? They are releasing new technology. The theory also finds a comfortable home in the world of New Age spirituality. Here, the Anunnaki are often stripped of their more sinister, slave-driving aspects and reimagined as spiritual forefathers or starseeds. People begin to believe they are descended from the Anunnaki, that their own souls have an extraterrestrial origin. The Anunnaki become less like a historical theory and more like a personal identity. You can find guided meditations to activate your Anunnaki DNA or channelings from supposed Anunnaki spirits, offering spiritual guidance. The story provides a powerful sense of personal specialness and a connection to a grand, cosmic drama. A quirky fringe tidbit in this pop culture invasion is how the Anunnaki have even made their way into the world of hip-hop. Several artists, particularly those in the conscious or alternative hip-hop scenes, have referenced the Anunnaki in their lyrics. They use the story as a powerful metaphor for systemic oppression, secret knowledge, and the struggle for liberation. The tale of a slave race created by powerful overlords to mine gold resonates deeply as an allegory for modern economic and racial exploitation. It's a testament to the story's raw power that it can be adapted to fit so many different cultural niches, from New Age self-help to social justice commentary. Scholars, particularly sociologists and folklorists, still debate why theories like the Anunnaki story are so incredibly popular and persistent, even in the face of overwhelming contradictory evidence. Some argue it's a symptom of a decline in trust in traditional institutions and experts. When people feel that scientists, governments, and historians are not telling them the whole truth, they become more open to alternative explanations that claim to offer the real story. Others see it as a modern manifestation of a very old human need, the need for a good story. The Anunnaki theory is a fantastic story. It has heroes, villains, high stakes, and it explains everything. It gives history a plot. It's more exciting than the slow, patient, and often ambiguous work of real archaeology. In a way, the pop culture Anunnaki have become a new pantheon. They serve the same function as the old gods. They provide explanations for the unexplainable. They offer a sense of connection to a powerful, hidden reality, and they are the main characters in stories that help people make sense of their place in the universe. Zecharia Sitchin didn't just write a series of books. Whether he intended to or not, he launched a new religion, one perfectly suited for the age of mass media. The gods of Sumer, it seems, were not done with us yet. They just needed a new publicist and a television deal. The journey is coming to an end. The lights are dimming. The fan is humming its steady, soothing drone, and the clamor of gods and rockets begins to fade into a gentle quiet. We've traveled from the dusty plains of ancient Sumer to the cold, imaginary depths of space, from the pages of clay tablets to the glowing screens of the 21st century. We are left with two towering narratives, standing side by side in the twilight of our story. One is built of scholarship, of linguistics, of the patient work of archaeology. The other is built of speculation, of reinterpretation, of a desire for a more cinematic past. The final verdict is yours to consider as you drift toward sleep. On one side, you have the academic consensus. It presents a story of human ingenuity. The Sumerians, a truly remarkable people, look up at the same sky you do, feel the same sun, and plant their crops in the same earth. To make sense of their world, a world of unpredictable floods and bountiful harvests, of political ambition, and the quiet terror of the unknown, they create a powerful and complex mythology. Their gods, the Anunnaki, are grand personifications of these forces. Enlil is the raging storm. Enki is the clever water. Inanna is the fierce passion of both love and war. Their stories are not a record of alien visitation, but a testament to the power of the human imagination to give a face to the faceless and a voice to the silent forces that govern our lives. Their astronomical knowledge is not a hand-me-down from the stars, but the hard-won prize of generations of patient observation, a people smart enough to map the heavens on their own. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Sumerians laid the groundwork for much of Western civilization's science and culture, a legacy that needs no alien intervention to be considered miraculous. On the other side, you have the grand, sweeping narrative of Zecharia Sitchin and his successors, a story that re-enchants the world. It takes the dusty artifacts from museum shelves and plugs them into a high-voltage cosmic drama. In this version, you are not just the product of mundane evolution. You are the child of the stars, a deliberate creation, a hybrid of earthly primates and celestial beings. Your deepest instincts, your obsession with gold, your reverence for authority might be echoes of their programming. The ancient monuments are not just impressive feats of human labor, but signposts of a forgotten age of high technology. The myths are not just stories. They are history, misunderstood, and waiting to be decoded. This narrative answers the great, lonely question of, are we alone? With a resounding no, and they were our parents, our creators, and our first masters. Scholars and believers will forever argue over the truth of the Anunnaki, a debate that generates far more heat than light. The evidence for the academic view is, by any rational measure, overwhelming. The evidence for the ancient astronaut theory relies on a chain of speculation, where each link is forged from a reinterpreted word or a reimagined image. But the power of a story, as we've seen, is not always tied to its literal factual truth. The Sitchin narrative persists because it's a good story. It's a myth for the space age, providing a sense of cosmic significance that can feel absent in a purely scientific worldview. Here is one final, quirky tidbit to mull over as you get comfortable. There's a concept in philosophy and science fiction called a self-fulfilling prophecy, or sometimes a hyperstition, an idea or story that, once told, starts to make itself real. The Anunnaki theory, in a strange way, has done this. By telling a story of aliens who guided human culture, the theory itself has become a powerful force guiding modern pop culture, influencing beliefs, art, and spirituality. The Anunnaki of Sitchin's books may not have been real, but the Anunnaki, as a modern cultural phenomenon, are undeniably real. They have, in a sense, been willed into existence by the power of a good story. So, as your breathing deepens and your thoughts begin to soften and drift, you are left with this final choice. Who were the Anunnaki? Were they the gods of the Sumerians, born from the human need to understand the world? Or were they the astronauts of Sitchin, born from a modern need to find our place in the cosmos? Perhaps the most peaceful answer lies somewhere in the middle. The Sumerians looked at the sky and saw gods. We look at the same sky and see planets, stars, and the possibility of visitors. Both are acts of imagination, of trying to read a story written in the stars. Both are ways of saying that the universe is far bigger and far more mysterious than our small lives. And in that shared sense of wonder, both the ancient scribe and the modern dreamer can find common ground. The story is over. The evidence has been weighed. Now there is only the quiet of the room and the vast, silent dark. And so, as the weight of the day finally settles, and the boundary between consciousness and the dream world begins to blur, you let the questions go. The great epic tales of gods and spaceships, of gold and of creation, all dissolve into the soft, quiet static of the approaching night. The figures of Enki and Enlil, of Sitchin and the scholars, fade like ink washed from a page, their arguments, and their evidence becoming less important than the simple physical reality of your own comfort, the gentle rise and fall of your own breathing. The mysteries of ancient Sumer can wait for another day, another time. They are safely tucked away now, buried once more under the imaginary dust of millennia, silent and still. For now, there is no need for answers, no need for verdicts or conclusions. There is only the feeling of release, a slow, gentle letting go of the world of facts and stories, and an embrace of the peaceful, formless, and welcoming void of a deep and restorative sleep. The vastness of space and the depths of time contract to this single serene point, this present moment, where you are safe, you are comfortable, and you are perfectly at rest, drifting easily and effortlessly into your own quiet dreams.